It all started on a crisp autumn morning when I made the drive out to my lake cabin, a quiet, rustic getaway nestled at the edge of Pine Cliff Lake. The leaves had just started to turn, and the reflection of red and gold shimmered across the still. Water, like a masterpiece painted by nature itself. That cabin had been in my family for decades, built by my grandfather after returning from World War II, passed down to my father, and eventually to me. It wasn't just a building. It was a living memory of family barbecues, summer swims, fishing trips, and late-night bonfires. The first sign of trouble had surfaced about a year ago when the local HOA president, Harold Densmore, approached me about formalizing my property into their homeowners association. My cabin, however, was grandfathered into the community long before the HOA existed. Legally, I wasn't bound to them. Harold didn't take kindly to my refusal. His first attempts were polite, an invitation to join, mailed flyers, even a welcome basket. But when I continued to decline, things turned sour. The pressure mounted slowly. They claimed my boat dock was out of code. Then they said my wooden deck was a hazard. Harold even had the nerve to report that my fire pit violated community regulations. I fought them each time and won because the law was on my side. But each victory made Harold more aggressive, more determined. Then came the citations, notices, began piling up for nonsense infractions, unauthorized landscaping, disruptive noise levels on weekends, and even improper display of signage when I hung a vintage "Welcome to the Lake" sign my dad had carved. I knew they were trying to wear me down, to make me feel like a pest in my own home. But what they didn't know was that I'm not the type to back down. I installed cameras, documented everything, and kept records of every interaction. I made friends with neighbors, most of whom quietly expressed their own frustrations with the HOA. Harold had created a culture of fear, one where people complied just to avoid being targeted, but I wasn't going to be intimidated. Then one night, everything changed. I was out of town for work, and my phone started ringing off the hook. A neighbor was calling me frantically. "Your cabin's on fire," he said. "The whole thing's up in flames." My heart sank. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but smoldering wood, melted metal, and ashes. The fire department had done their job, but it was too late. The structure was gone, and yet the cause was unclear. No lightning, no gas leak, no faulty wiring. But one thing caught my eye. The remnants of my surveillance system had been tampered with. Someone had disabled it before the fire. The arson investigators concluded it was deliberate. The fire had started from an accelerant poured at the back entrance. There was no doubt now. Someone had burned down my family's legacy. I didn't need to guess who did it. Harold Densmore might have thought he got away with it. No witnesses, no security footage, no confession. But what Harold didn't realize was that this wasn't just about a cabin anymore. This was war. While the ashes cooled, I was already working on the next phase. The county's land records showed something interesting. While the HOA had authority over the subdivision nearby, the land they built their clubhouse on, the centerpiece of their social control, was never fully transferred from private ownership. Turns out, Harold had overlooked a small but critical clause in a decades-old deed. I tracked down the original landowner, an old man living 2 states over who never realized the paperwork hadn't been finalized. For the right price, he agreed to transfer that tiny but powerful strip of land to me. Within a month, I owned the land beneath their HOA clubhouse. The silence from Harold and his board was golden when I served them with an official notice to vacate the premises. They had 60 days to comply or face legal action for trespassing. The clubhouse, their prized domain where they held their weekly power meetings, yoga classes, and wine socials, was now mine. But I wasn't done yet. I began holding my own meetings in the building. Open invites. Everyone from the community was welcome, especially those tired of the HOA's iron-fisted rule. People began talking, and for the first time, the community was splitting away from Harold's grip. I didn't just change the locks, I changed the atmosphere. No more petty fines. No more silent fear. I put up flyers for a potluck and invited every resident. We ate, we talked, we shared grievances. Many of them had their own horror stories. Fines for having holiday decorations up too long, penalties for leaving their trash bins out a few hours too late, warnings for planting flowers that weren't HOA approved. What had started as a local governing body meant to protect community standards had mutated into a dictatorship, and as the new legal landowner, I filed a civil lawsuit for the destruction of my cabin. While the criminal investigation was ongoing, I had enough circumstantial evidence to make things miserable for Harold. Subpoenas flew, and under pressure, one of his own board members flipped, revealing that Harold had joked multiple times about finally solving the cabin problem with a little spark. The look on Harold's face when he was served with the lawsuit, in the very clubhouse he no longer owned, was priceless. But I wasn't going to stop until justice was done. Over the next few weeks, I worked with a legal team to dig even deeper. I requested a full audit of the HOA's finances. What we found was shocking: misallocated funds, phantom vendors, and payments made to companies owned by Harold's cousin. When presented with this, the board had no choice but to vote Harold out. By the time the community election rolled around, Harold was facing not just civil litigation, but a full-blown criminal investigation, and that was just the beginning. The morning Harold Densmore received the official lawsuit paperwork was one I'll never forget. I didn't have to witness it in person. I had cameras installed at the former HOA clubhouse by then, but the footage was everything I hoped for. Harold had marched in with his usual smug authority, flanked by 2 board members, still treating the building like his throne room. When the process server stepped inside and asked for him by name, you could see Harold's shoulders tighten. "Phew. Moment!" The folder exchanged hands. He froze. His face flushed from red to pale in seconds. He tore open the envelope like it might contain some last-minute reprieve. It didn't. Just page after page of my civil suit. Charges of property destruction, trespassing, harassment, and emotional damages. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, sitting in a building he no longer had the legal right to enter, being served by the very man he'd tried to drive out of the community. By the end of that day, Harold and his board had locked themselves in the small conference room of the clubhouse, blinds drawn, blindsided. But I didn't stop there. That weekend, I held an open town hall for the entire neighborhood inside the very same building. Word had spread like wildfire that I now owned the place, and people were curious, tired. Some were outright angry at Harold, and more than a few had quietly reached out to me with their own horror stories. Fines for grass an inch too high. Letters threatening foreclosure for minor infractions. One man, a retired veteran named Joe, had been threatened with legal action for building a wheelchair ramp for his disabled wife because it didn't conform to visual guidelines. I stood at the front of the room and told my story. Everything: the harassment, the false citations, the fire, the investigation, the land deal, and how I now owned the ground beneath the HOA's feet. Literally. You could feel the shift in the room as I spoke. Nods, gasps. One woman wiped her eyes. These people weren't just neighbors. They were victims, too. By the end of the night, I had 40 signatures on a petition demanding the dissolution of the current HOA board. The momentum had started. Of course, Harold didn't take this quietly. The very next morning, he filed a motion to contest my ownership of the clubhouse property, alleging that the transfer had been illegal, citing a half-baked claim about zoning ordinances and deed history. I showed up to that court date with a full legal team, a folder of verified county records, and even a signed affidavit from the previous landowner. The judge reviewed everything, frowned at Harold's mess of a submission, and ruled in my favor within the hour. Case dismissed. My ownership upheld. Harold looked like he aged 10 years in that moment. He stormed out of the courtroom with 2 of his loyal board members trailing behind like defeated puppies. But I wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, the criminal, Investigation into the fire continued. Without direct evidence tying Harold to the act of arson, the authorities were cautious, but my civil suit had already uncovered damning testimony. Subpoenas gave me access to board meeting notes which, though scrubbed, still referenced property concerns at the lake and budget discussions that oddly mentioned future construction on land that included my cabin's location. But the turning point came when one of the HOA's maintenance contractors, a guy named Leon, stepped forward. He claimed Harold had offered him $10,000 cash to take care of an eyesore on the lakefront. Leon said he turned it down, but that a week later Harold had hired a different crew, 2 guys not on the HOA payroll. Leon even had a partial license plate and a text message where Harold vaguely referenced cleaning up loose ends. With that, the police finally had enough to bring Harold in for questioning. Now, I wasn't a fool. I knew even then that rich men in suburbia rarely serve time without a fight. Harold lawyered up fast, but the damage was done. The news of the investigation broke across local headlines. HOA president suspected in lake cabin arson, read one. Others weren't so kind. Suddenly, Harold's supporters vanished, board members quit, his allies ghosted him, and neighbors who once feared the HOA began tearing down the ridiculous approved fencing, painting their homes in forbidden colors, and laughing at the threats of fines that no longer held any weight. The new community meetings we hosted were a smash success. I opened them up to all. We started talking about forming a new Homeowners Council, a democratic one based on voluntary participation, with no mandatory dues or invasive rules. People liked the idea. Volunteers stepped up. A former accountant offered to oversee finances. Joe, the disabled veteran, became our community safety liaison. People were getting involved, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Meanwhile, Harold's world continued to unravel. His own house, one of the fancier properties in the neighborhood, went up for sale quietly. I later learned his wife had filed for separation shortly after the investigation began. He tried to blame it on the media, the pressure, the smear campaign, but no one was buying it. His lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement in my civil suit, offering a modest payout with no admission of guilt. I declined. I told them I wasn't in it for the money. I was in it for the truth. I wanted the court to hear everything. So we went to trial. The courtroom was packed. Local media showed up. Even the county commissioner attended. Rumor had it he had once been fined by Harold's HOA for having an unauthorized vegetable garden. The trial lasted a week. My lawyers laid out everything. The pattern of harassment, the false citations, the tampering with security cameras, the testimony from Leon, the suspicious budget notes. Harold's defense tried to frame me as a bitter recluse with a vendetta. But the facts spoke louder. The judge listened. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Verdict: Harold was found liable for targeted harassment, property destruction, and malicious intent. Damages awarded, $1.2 million. But the best part? The judge also issued a formal recommendation for criminal charges based on the evidence presented, urging the district attorney to reopen the arson case with fresh eyes. Harold walked out of that courtroom a broken man. By the end of the year, his home was foreclosed. He moved out of state. The HOA officially dissolved under pressure from the new community council, and my lake cabin? I rebuilt it, this time bigger, stronger, and with reinforced fireproof materials, solar panels, and a new security system, hardwired underground with satellite backups. The first weekend I spent in the new cabin felt surreal. The sun rose over Pine Cliff Lake just like it had years ago, but now, instead of a bitter war with a power-hungry dictator, there was peace, quiet, a new community that had risen from the ashes, literally and figuratively. Neighbors dropped by that weekend with drinks, firewood, and food. We lit a bonfire that night, the biggest one yet. Joe rolled in with his wife and cracked open a bottle of whiskey. The woman who once cried at my town hall brought homemade cookies. Laughter replaced the tension that once hung heavy in the air, and, as the fire cracked and flickered, I thought of my grandfather, how he built this place as a symbol of family, freedom, and legacy. They had tried to destroy that legacy, but all they'd done was wake something far more powerful. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Mine was served by firelight, surrounded by friends, with the man who tried to ruin me long gone, and the land, the cabin, the community stronger than it had ever been. The war was over, and I had won.